tabletop may be built with just about any type of material: plywood, 2x4 or 2x6 planking, as fancy or simple as you want it to be. I chose to build mine with sapele, an African mahogany, to match my kitchen countertop. I rigged the cut fence on my miter saw and cut a test piece to make sure I had the right length, allowing for some trimming later. The boards are 5.5 inches wide by 1.25 inch thick. I needed 10 pieces the same length and cut them first. I inspected each piece carefully as I placed them in my glue jig. Then I made a mark 3 inches from each end and then every 6 inches. Then I transferred the marks to each board, numbering each mark for future reference. I prepared each piece for joining discs and glue using my biscuit joiner. Each groove got an ample amount of glue and a number 20 biscuit. Let the glue cure for about an hour and remove the clamps. Then I trimmed both sections to exact size. The tabletop center board and the perimeter boards I ripped to 4.25 inch width, which will make the top 36 inches wide and 60 inches long. The two sections will be joined together with the center crosspiece. And framed by the 4.25 inch perimeter pieces I just ripped. Then I marked each section board in the center with corresponding marks on the center board. The next step is pretty self-explanatory. Now it's just a matter of cutting and fitting the perimeter pieces. No room for mistakes here. I have no extra sapele on hand. I laid out my biscuits 6 inches apart, plus 1 in the miters. So far, the top is looking like it's supposed to look, but there is still a lot of work to do. The miters are looking good. and my table slab is true and flat. I started out sanding with a fairly coarse belt, removing hardened glue and pencil marks, and went over it with a finer belt. I wanted nicely rounded corners and decided on a 2.5-inch radius. I had salvaged some sanding dust that, mixed with glue, makes for a good filler. When that had dried, I rough sanded the corners. The top was shaping up nicely. I wanted a bullnose edge on my top, and my heavy-duty router was up for the task. My router bit, on the other hand, should be replaced as it left burn marks. So far, so good. I flipped the top over and gave the underside the same treatment.
And a terrible tasting radish. Mostly we have burgers, brats and peas. It's good to get away, but home will always be the best. Been fun to see the country, but we miss our little nest. We hope to get back next year if we get a chance.
With 80 grit paper on my palm sander, I worked my way around the table, rolling the bullnose, making sure all burn marks were removed. Then I sanded with 220 grit and finished with 400 grit. Smooth as a baby's butt. I blew off all the dust and made sure there were no cracks to fill. The underside got a coat of sanding sealer and a coat of urethane, sanding between the coats. I wiped the edge with a paper towel in order to remove possible runs and drips. Once the sealer coat was dry, I sanded with 400 grit paper until I had a white powdered surface. I vacuum up all the fine dust before rolling and tipping the coat of urethane. By tipping the urethane with a brush, I removed bubbles while making sure I maintained a wet edge to avoid brush overlaps. I used a 6-inch high-density foam roller that I discarded after each use. Notice the direction I move the brush, the starting and ending point of each stroke. This alleviates brush overlaps and makes for a professional finish. Now for finishing the top side of my tabletop. I had last sanded with 400 grit paper on my palm sander. With a fine mesh on my orbital sander, I went over the entire surface several times, removing any possible sanding marks. I switched to a superfine mesh and went over the entire surface again. After another thorough vacuuming, I made several passes with a tack rag. Again, rolling and tipping sanding sealer. With each stroke, I'm getting closer to the end, and I'm looking forward to seeing the completed set in place. After 5 coats of this tedious process, I was happy with the finish. And even happier when I joined the tabletop with the table base.